Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Stark from Joto Paper. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our sublimation webinar. Jimmy Lamb will be your host, and I think it'll be a very good event and should be very informative. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. This is Jimmy Lamb from Sawgrass Technologies, and I'm going to be here with you for the next however long it takes to go through the subject as we discuss sublimation. It's a lot more than mouse pads and coffee mugs. And I wish to thank the people at Joto for bringing me over. Education is what I do for Sawgrass, and I do a lot of seminars, webinars, and always look forward to the opportunity to share information and experiences with people who are looking at sublimation as a business opportunity. So a couple of things before we get rolling here. Number one, the audio is one way, which means you can hear me, but I can't hear you. And as a result, if you have a question for me, or for Michael for that matter, then what I prefer that you do is wait until the very end, and you'll be able to text that message in. If you look at your control panel up in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a red rectangle with a white arrow. By clicking on that, that opens your control panel. In your control panel, there is a text box where you can type in a message, which comes directly to me, does not appear on the screen. No one else sees it, okay? And then we can take the questions that way. We'll read them back out, and then we'll answer them for you live on the presentation. Now, somebody once told me, they said, hey, you know what? Wait until the end. That's not good because I have a question in the middle, then I forget what it is. So that's okay. As soon as you have a question come to mind, go ahead and type it in. It goes into a queue, okay? Now, I may not answer it until the end because I traditionally turn the queue off because it clutters my screen, but I will get to it. So anytime something comes to mind, you want to go ahead and type it in, go right ahead and do it, and then we'll get to it there at the very end. Okay. Also, this event will be recorded, and therefore, you can watch it again over and over again if you choose to do so, and you can talk to Joto about that. Michael can tell us a little bit about it at the end of where he would post that so that you can access it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our subject here. Sublimation is a lot more than mouse pads and coffee mugs. Now, let me tell you, the way that I came up with that title is I've been in the business for many years, the business of decoration. And I started out as a non-digital decorator. My early days were embroidery. And sublimation was one of those things that's like, what the heck is that? Okay, because I didn't really fully understand the process or what you could do with it. And the kind of joke that went around the industry was, oh, that's just for mouse pads and coffee mugs. Okay, and because of that, that just kind of always stuck in the back of my head as I started to find out just how many other things that you could actually do with sublimation, way beyond mouse pads and coffee mugs. Okay, and as you're going to see today, we have a lot of different things that you can do to make money using this process. So first of all, what the heck is sublimation? Okay, well, it's a digital printing process, and it involves the use of digital transfers. Okay, and if you've done digital transfers, then you kind of understand how that works. But it's uniquely different from a traditional digital transfer, mainly by the chemical process that defines sublimation that makes it so unique. Typically, when we're talking about true printing, we're talking about applying an ink to the surface of an item that you're decorating. Okay, with screen printing, it's very obvious because we have the inks up there on the top, and with direct-to-garment printing and some of the other processes, we're actually applying an ink that's more or less to the surface. Okay, sublimation is actually a dye process rather than a true printing process, so we call it printing all the time. Okay, and with dyeing, we're actually recoloring the fibers of the item that we're decorating, which leads to a very, very permanent type of application that doesn't peel or crack or fade in the case of apparel when we wash it over and over again. So it works kind of like this. It's a chemical process that uses sublimation dye to apply a graphic. And what we do is we put that dye on a piece of transfer paper, and we heat that up to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit using a heat press. And the combination of the heat and pressure of the heat press turn that dye into a gas. And now that gas will actually permeate and attach to any polymer fiber that it comes in contact with, namely the substrate that we're decorating. Now, At the same time, those polymer fibers are opening up kind of like a clamshell. And when they open up, they actually absorb that sublimation dye into them, physically coming inside of them. And then as it cools back down, they close back up and capture that dye. And that's what makes it so permanent and so scratch-proof in the case of a lot of the hard surfaces that we decorate. So it's truly a unique application that chemically sets itself apart from pretty much every other type of printing process out there that you may be using or dealing with. Okay, I mentioned the polymer aspect, and that might sound like a turnoff also, a limiting factor. We don't like limitations if we can help that, but the reality is sublimation works with polymer fibers. It does not work with cotton fibers. Now, that may sound very limiting, especially if you're an apparel guy, and we'll talk more about the apparel in just a minute, but the reality is there's hundreds of items out there that have polymer coatings on them that are ready to be sublimated, okay? And because of that, we have lots of different things that we can offer, lots of different markets. So there's plenty of applications for sublimation. Don't let that throw you off, okay, lining that up. Always remember when we're talking about inks and dyes that there is not like a one-size-fits-all ink. Certain inks bond chemically with cotton fibers, for example, when we're talking about apparel, whereas other processes like sublimation bond with polymer fibers. So when we talk about polyester, okay, this is what sublimation is probably best known for. But that's just an important aspect, matching the ink set to the item being decorated. Now, sublimation is also well known in the world of photography because of its ability to reproduce in very fine detail and vivid color and full clarity photographic images. In fact, we have professional photographers who recreate high-dollar items like wedding portraits using sublimation. Remember, sublimation doesn't crack or peel, so the ability for these items to withstand some abuse over time is significant, and that's one of the reasons it's used. But mainly it's used because of the fact that you can do such beautiful reproductions, picture-perfect reproductions. And that opens your doors to a whole lot of things. You may not be in the photography business, but being able to reproduce photographic images is a way that you can actually expand your business. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation. And finally, there is that apparel aspect. Now, sublimation only works for 100% polyester products. And if you're like me, who's been around the business for a few years, when you hear polyester in terms of apparel, you're kind of like, ick, not for me, okay? And there's a reason for that, but we'll leave that alone. But I'll tell you, one of the hottest selling products out there right now in the marketplace is poly performance apparel. And poly performance apparel, yes, it's 100% poly, but the performance factor means that it has the moisture wicking capabilities, which means it's warm in the winter, cool in the summer. Very important aspects because that enhances the value of that particular item. Now, poly performance products do cost a little bit more than, say, a 50-50 t-shirt, polo shirt, sweatshirt, or even 100% cotton, okay? But there's significant differences. You want to keep that in mind if you go into marketing poly performance. First of all, we do call it performance apparel. We don't want to stick too hard on polyester, so we call it performance apparel. Secondly, you got to be careful about identifying t-shirts as t-shirt, because for a lot of people, the word t-shirt is synonymous with very low-cost item, okay? If they come down here where I live, I'm on the coast of North Carolina at the beach, you know, they'll see places where you can buy 5 t-shirts for $10. Then they're going to go home and expect all t-shirts to be $2 each. Not going to be the case, especially when we talk about sublimation. But with sublimation, when we're using sublimation on these poly performance items, when you launder it, it will not fade, crack, or peel. In fact, the image will outlast the garment probably many times over. So that's what adds the value into poly performance apparel. Number one, moisture wicking capabilities. Number two, longevity of the item when we're using sublimation. Now, if your customers aren't sure what we're talking about when we say performance apparel, just refer them to Under Armour, because Under Armour is one who have taken poly performance and made it pretty much a household type of product. Okay, use that combination to point things out. That helps people to understand what they're buying. And keep that in mind, too, because Under Armour, it has some fairly high price points. An Under Armour t-shirt in a typical sporting goods store retails for $25. Keep that in mind when you're pricing your garments. You don't want to put performance apparel head-to-head with non-performance apparel because it's several steps above. So there's tons of products and applications as well as markets for sublimation. And this is a perfect add-on. You may be doing something like screen printing. You may be doing direct-to-garment. You may be doing embroidery. You may be doing none of that. You might be sign making. You may be a trophy maker. You may be doing engraving. You may be doing just, straight-run printed media. Whatever it is you're doing, sublimation can help you take it to a higher level. The ASI, which is the Ash Specialty Institute, did some reports recently where they found that it costs approximately 6 times more effort, time, and money to bring in a new customer than to service an existing customer. And keeping that in mind, if you have an existing business, you have a customer base. By adding something like sublimation, it's a very low-cost way to add more items to give to your existing customers. And in this day and age right now, economy is a little bit tough. We see a lot of people cutting back on their orders. And if your traditional customers are ordering less this year than last year because they got a little tighter budget, okay, being able to offer some of these other products means that you can get more of their dollar coming out of their pocket. And that's important because if they came to you for something, they're probably leaving you for something else because you didn't supply it. Now maybe with sublimation, you've opened the doors to supply their other needs, so you're getting more of their dollars. Definitely want to be thinking about that. What can it really do for you? So let's just look a little bit closer so you understand the sublimation process mechanically. Okay, I gave you a brief synopsis, but mechanically, production-wise, it's very simple, very low-cost methodology here. It involves 3 major components: a computer. And how many of you don't have a computer? Raise your hand if you don't have a computer. Yeah, that's what I thought. Everybody has a computer, right? And if you're like me, I got 5 of them. 5 good ones too. That doesn't include the 386 from years ago. All right. So you have a computer, and you'll be using a printer, typically what we call a desktop inkjet style of printer. You can't just use any printer, unfortunately, but definitely we're not talking about going out and buying a $10,000 specialized piece of equipment. We're talking about stock off-the-shelf equipment. And then a heat press. And if you're going to do round items, this happens to be what we call a mug press for doing specifically coffee mugs, water bottles, rounded items like that. These are the main components. So let's see how they work together to form sublimation. So our first step is what we call create. In fact, we call the process create, print, press, 3 steps. Step 1, create. We're going to start it with a computer, and we're going to use basic graphics software that you probably already have. Nice thing about sublimation, you don't have to buy a specialized software program. You can work with CorelDRAW. You can work with the Adobe suite. Photoshop Elements works very well. Basically, if you can create a JPEG, a good quality JPEG, and put it on your screen, you can sublimate it. But we do, tend to lean towards CorelDRAW and Adobe, both Photoshop and Illustrator, as being our mainstay programs that sublimators use. Okay, so we're going to set up our design on screen. Now, a lot of the things that we decorate with sublimation have oddball shapes and sizes. Okay, maybe oddball is the wrong word. Unique is a better word. And a lot of times when people are first getting into this, they're generating an image, and what does your typical JPEG image look like? It looks like a rectangle. So how do you deal with, you can see the image of the frog over here. We have a nice, square in this case, and we want to put it on a coaster. And this coaster is represented right here by this image in the middle. So how do I get a square image in a round situation? This reminds me of that test the psychiatrists do, trying to put the square peg in a round hole. Yeah, think about that for a minute. Okay, it's a very simple way to do it. First of all, the companies that make the blanks that we decorate, many of those companies will provide you with a template for a specific item. In this case, this is a coaster from Unisub, and they have provided a template both in a Corel format, and they also have one in a Photoshop format. So what I've done is I'll take that template and I'll put it on screen, and if I'm using CorelDRAW, I'm going to put that on screen. And then I'm going to take the actual image that I need to place on there. I can combine the two together, use the power clip function of CorelDRAW, and what it does is it crops and resizes the image, as you can see over on the far right, to be a perfect mate to that coaster. Very important, very easy, and doesn't cost you anything, okay? And that's how we work with, and as you see as we go through this, there's a lot of different substrates or blank items that we're going to decorate.